Now let's kind of just dip into one of these other fancier menus over here. And we're going to look at how to use particles, because particles are in the simulate menu where there's a bunch of this other fancy stuff, but particles are a pretty basic part of doing 3D. So let's just go in here to the particles menu and let's make an emitter. So what an emitter is something that emits particles, and to see it work, you want to press play. And now it's spitting out these particles. It's not very exciting, but let's go to our rotate tool and let's rotate it 90 degrees so it's shooting the particles up. And then all this stuff is pretty much what you see is what you get working with particles. So if we click on this particle emitter, we have our birth rate editor. So if we change that to 50, that's how many particles are going to show up here in the editor. And then we also have a separate render setting. So you can set this really low and then have more be rendered if your system is too slow. The speed is something that you're probably going to want to change a lot of the time. And then there's a variation, as you can see on some of these parameters, which will add some randomness so they're not all the same speed or whatever these parameters are. You can have them rotate, which you won't see with these particles. We have to put something in here. We have to put an actual object in the particles because these are just kind of placeholder particles. Because as you see, if we render these, nothing happens because there's no geometry. So we're going to say show objects. There's no objects in there yet, but when we do put them in there, then we'll actually see them. So let's make a cube. Let's press T. Let's scale it down and make it about this big. Go back to our move tool. And let's just drop that into the emitter. And now you can see that the emitter is emitting these cubes. So if we go back, now we have it shooting these cubes out. And that's what the show objects is for, because if you don't have that checked, then you won't see your objects. So the rotation, if we change this to 0, you see they're not rotating, so you can actually put 360. Now they're rotating with 100% variation, so it should look pretty random. And just a couple other things you can do with these particles. You can go back up to the simulate particle menu, and let's say you want to add some gravity. So these things just don't go up out into space, because actually let's turn the gravity off and let's show you. See how they're just going up out into space. So when we turn gravity on, now they're going to be affected by gravity. And this acceleration is really the strength of the gravity. So we can turn this up to 500. So now they're kind of falling back down to Earth. And you're probably wanting a floor, right? So they actually hit the floor or bounce off something. So we can go up to create environment and floor and just make sure that our emitter is above the floor. And so as you can see, they're still going through the floor. So when we're working with this particle system, to prevent them from going to the floor, you're going to want to go up to particles and you want a deflector. So it makes this deflector, which is not pointing the way that we want. So we're going to go put it 90 degrees, and luckily it's right here on the floor. And then we can scale this up too, try to cover the floor. So now when we press play, you can see that the particles actually bounce off this floor because it's a deflector. And then you can control how much they bounce. So if we only put 30%, they're not going to bounce very much. Kind of roll there. And also in the emitter, if we go into our emitter and our emitter settings, we can control the angle that it shoots out. So if we go 30 and 30, now you should kind of see that they're spraying out more. They're not just going straight out. And we can change the size of the emitter too if we want to make it a little smaller thing. And we can go and add some more frames to this animation. So let's go 240 so we can let this play out for a little bit. So with these fields, these are like particle fields. You have attractors, so wherever you put this, it will attract the particles. You saw what the deflector does. The destructor kills the particles. You saw gravity. Rotation is like this rotation field. So you can imagine inside this box, it's kind of like this tornado. So when the particles, when they actually just hit it, you see how they're going around it now? Because we have this giant tornado field here. because we have this giant tornado field here. So let's turn this down and let's try rotating it, see what happens. There we go. So now it's throwing in this weird rotational field in here. So you can use this to get some different effects. And in the particles, turbulence adds turbulence, so it'll add some randomness just to the way things move. And then in your particles, and then you have wind, which will add wind. And you see this little fan, so it blows in the direction of where this arrow is pointing to down the z-axis. So we can turn this wind speed up. Let's try it like 500, and as you can see now it's blowing these way over there. So you can play around with this stuff. You can put another deflector here and it'll hit the wall. And if you want this emitter to last longer, as you can see it stops, that's in your stop emission. So if we went stop emission 240, now it'll emit the whole time. That's how you control that. So those are just a couple different things about particles. So you can go in here, and now if you click render, it will actually render the particles. So particles are used for a bunch of different things. So you can use particles for a bunch of different things if you're creating. So particles are kind of a fun way to add a little bit of. So that's just a basic usage of particles. So that's just a basic usage of particles. I'll show more advanced stuff in the CG production film series, but I just wanted to give you a little introduction on how to use those.